An all-new episode of The Jeremy White Show.
Available wherever you stream.
Hey, there you go. Oh, that's hilarious. That's exactly the spot where you do all your interviews. That's funny.
Yeah, of course it's the same spot. Shocking.
I'm like, oh shit, no, it's legit. He's in the spot.
That's where the mic is.
I love that. Well, we're already recording. We'll get right into this. Very excited to talk to this man, absolute legend in the guitar community. I was just at a bar picking up my cousin and went inside. And I'm like, yeah, I gotta go. I'm interviewing Dave Friedman. They're like, and two of the guys at the bar were like, Dave Friedman, what? Tell him we know who he is. So there you go. I just told you. Welcome to the show for the first time, the one, the only, Dave Friedman. How's it going?
It's going great, man. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, just it's Thursday. I'm excited because the weekend's right around the corner. It's been a long day of interviews. And what'd you get up to today? I feel like this is an AA meeting now.
Man, you know what? I did paperwork all day today.
Isn't that the fun side of running a business, having to do the paperwork?
Sending some invoices, sending some different things to people, and I just like stuff. Oh, God, I got to get this done. All right, that's it. I'm doing it.
Yeah. How much actual amp work are you doing on a daily?
I do stuff all the time. Amp work, rig work. I mean, all the time, really. I mean, you know, depends on the day, man. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Today, nothing.
Nice. You didn't touch a soldering iron, like nothing. It was a chill day.
Not today. I had to make a video for someone to show them how to do something, but
Oh, that's actually pretty cool. I didn't know like you would like you do stuff like that. Like if I'm having a problem with an amp, I can like be like, hey, can you just show me how to do this real quick? Or
yeah, sure. Why? Whatever it takes, you know.
Talk a little bit about
all my own customer service, so you know it's that's insane.
Well, you know what? That goes a long way though, because when you're dealing with a big corporation, or I mean, like to try and get a replacement part or go through a service center and this and that, it's like it's such an arm and it's such a hassle. But if you're the guy and the point of contact, it's like I mean, it makes it so much easier. But then you also got like weirdos all the time too, I'm sure. So.
Well, you know, I always said that the issue is this: if someone else does it, right? If someone else is doing the customer service and the customer contacts that person and they ask them a question about blah, blah, blah amp, then that customer service emails me and says, hey, this guy's got this question about this amp. And then I have to type it back to the customer service person anyway.
Yeah.
And at that point, I might as well just type, you know.
Yeah. Cut out the middleman.
Yeah. Send it to the customer and less chance of it getting messed up.
Right. I was just, I did a show with Brett Michaels over the weekend, and the opening band had a Friedman amp on stage. And I was like, oh, I got Dave Friedman coming on. And I didn't take down the model number or anything, but it's cool to see, like, you got Marshalls, you got EVH, but it's awesome to see, like, Friedman amps on stage. That must be, like, a real thrill for you to see your name alongside those big names and big brands on stages around the world.
Yeah, I guess it is. You know, I don't really think about it anymore. You know, it's just this is the normal thing. I mean,
it's like a household name at this point. It's our
brand has become quite big, and I've become quite, I guess they call legendary. I guess I don't know, but you know, I don't like to deem myself that. But okay,
look at you being humble. I know I've probably been covered 1,000 times on other shows, but it's just real quick. I mean, like, what made you get in? Where did your fascination with guitar and guitar gear start?
Oh man, I was a guitar player in Detroit, Michigan, or a suburb of Detroit, and you know, when I started, first concert would have been like in 1981, The Who. I was pretty young though then. And you know, I just became not only obsessed with the music and the players, because you know, I grew up in the Guitar Hero era, so to speak, right? You know, you know, all the greats really sort of came from that era, you know, unless you're talking 70s people, you know, like Jimmy Page or something, but
right. But our favorites came pretty much from the 80s.
From the 80s, yeah, it came from the 80s. And you know, not only was I, because I was a new guitar player, I was like, how do they get that sound?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I like Angus Young's sound? Why? What makes that different from Tony Iommi? What makes that different from Eddie Van Halen? What that makes that different from Judas Priest? And I was kind of obsessed. It was almost like figuring out what what it was that made up their signature tones, and they all had kind of signature tones,
Right.
and it's more cookie cutter these days. You know what I mean? It's just like everyone sort of sounds the same.
I find that too. I mean, like you listen to a lot of rock, like modern rock or even like country productions, and like everybody's guitar tone sounds the same. Everybody's got the same drum loops and drum samples, and like there's nothing really that sticks out. Like, or when you heard Alex Van Halen, you knew it was Alex Van Halen. But today, if I hear Geth from the Struts, who are a great band, but his snare sounds just like Greta Van Fleet's snare, and like there's no different. You can't really differentiate the two.
Yeah. Exactly. And yeah, so I just like I said, I just became obsessed with I wanted the knowledge of how they went about getting the tones that they had.
Right.
Took a lot of years to gather that knowledge, but I did it.
But it's kind of like what makes a Mutt Lange record different from a Bruce Fairbairn record or a Bob Rock record. Like, why does Mutt's vocals sound like that, but then Bruce's drums sound this way? Like, if you're chasing that tone and you're more interested in the gear side of it, I mean, did you ever want to be the performer on the stage, or was it the backstage?
Yeah, I mean,
stuff
originally, yeah, when I was a kid, sure, I wanted to be a guitar player. Sure, I wanted to be the performer on the stage, but that slowly went away when I moved to California in 1980s, late 87, early 88. That's a little foggy on when that was exactly. And actually, yeah, that's about right. And I went to work for a company called Andy Brower Studio Rentals, who was a studio instrument rental company and cartage company. So cartage meaning carting studio guitar players' gear to the sessions that they were doing. At the time, there was music being made and many records being made and lots of sessions and lots of studios. And I started working in that field, and with the rental end of that was huge at the time. And I mean, that became my library of sounds, because they had every tweed Fender, every blackface Fender, every variety of modified Marshall, every variety of cabinet and guitars, and so on and so on and so forth.
You had everything at your disposal.
Everything at the disposal all the time, could hear it all, and I heard everything. And you were doing it. You were taking it to sessions and stuff and bringing it back. When you brought it back, you had to check the product in, and you make sure it was still working and everything. So yeah, you got to hear literally everything. And that's where it became, that's the library, I call it. Not many people ever have heard all the amps that I've heard.
Yeah, especially being in that setting, so many things just coming and going. I mean, like, and having to test them. I'm sure if you just compare a twin to like a blackface, you could tell the difference between the two just like from your ears instantly.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you just learn. I mean, you learn that most blackface Fender amps are all the same. Just some slight variations in power levels and everything else. But then tweed amps are very different from blackfaced amps, and a Soldano mod sounded different than a Lee Jackson modified Marshall. Talk a
little bit about that. I mean, just for the casual consumer that isn't into gear and stuff like the way we are, what does that mean when you modify an amplifier compared to something that's stock from the store?
Well, generally, when someone asks me to modify an amplifier, they're looking to take this old amp, let's just hypothetically say a JCM 800 or an old JMP, and they want me to hot rod it. So they want it to have gain, and they want what I generally do, or they have a specific idea of what they want. And it's my job to alter the circuit to be what they're interested in having.
Now, what is a guitar amp? Like, how is it made technically? I mean, like, it's a bunch of wires thrown together and some tubes, and it sounds good, but like theoretically,
how
like,
to answer that one? I mean, it's a tube amplifier. How do I answer that? What is a tube amp? I mean,
yeah, I mean, like, how does like all these parts come together, and then you get this incredible guitar sound that comes out of it? I mean, like physically, how the hell does this thing work?
Well, it starts.
It's not a computer; it's an analog unit. So it's like obviously it's a chain reaction of electrical components.
It's an amplifier, so it starts amplifying an input signal which is a guitar level out of a magnetic pickup, and then it basically, to put it simply, it boosts that up in level, and then it would cascade into another, shall we say, booster amp. I'm making this really simple here.
Yeah.
Which in turn, that first stage might distort the second stage. And the parts you choose around those stages will determine, what the tone is you're going to get out of it. You want less bass, use a smaller capacitor. You want more bass, use a bigger capacitor. You want it to be tighter, looser, and it just kind of goes on through the amp, and eventually it amplifies it out to 100 watts, 50 watts, 20 watts, whatever the amplifier is.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to put that really basic.
I asked you that question because somebody recently asked me that. They're like, well, what is a guitar amp? Like, why are they so expensive? And like, what is it? I'm like, well, it makes your guitar like louder. And they're like, but how does it work? Like, what is it? Is there a computer in it? And I'm like, well, no, there's tubes and there's wires, but I actually didn't have an answer. I was like, that's a good question.
I don't really have an answer either. And no one's ever asked that question.
It's a good one though, right?
Yeah. It's a good question, and I hopefully I explained it kind of what the concept was.
So around what time and did you become sort of of course Soldano and all these guys, but like when did like you become the guy that all the rock stars would go to for their mods and their amps?
Well, it didn't start with that. So my career started with building rigs for guitar players. So
the Bradshaw racks and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I was the other guy.
Oh, okay, cool.
So I was the other guy at the time. Bob, of course, was the first guy, that did it really commercially. But I was like the other. There was hardly any people doing it then, and I became like the second guy that is still doing it.
Okay. Right.
So Bob was first. I kind of came in second as a whippersnapper little kid compared to Bob, and I guess
was Bob pissed?
At the time he was pissed, but we're friends now. I think at the time he wasn't very happy. But I started doing session guitar players, guitar rigs, other people's guitar rigs, and that over the years you become already a well-respected guy in this professional community, and then you started getting into amps. So then these people are, oh, what do you got there? Okay. And that it all started in the early 90s when I partnered with Bruce Egnater for the very early Egnater designs that came out, which was a 4-channel guitar preamp, because at the time guitar preamps were like the big thing. And called the IE4, and then we did an amp head, and then eventually he sold to Rocktron, and then my partnership with that was done, and we moved on, and down the road I did something with an amp company called Blankenship, where I did an amp called the Variplex with them, and
nice, and
that was cool. But I mean, my mentor with amp work was Bruce Egnater. So yeah. And then eventually around 2009 I started really manufacturing my own under my own brand name.
Name and brand. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about the rigs that you were kind of churning out. I mean, like, what would guitar players want from you when they come and see you? Because this was around the time of the super processed, over, modulated, chorusy delays, like wet, dry, wet rigs. And
early it was. It kind of morphed over the years, though, during the 90s and things. I went to more pedal board based things, or more pedal based switching systems, meaning pedals in drawers in a rack, and they're switched remotely,
right?
Which is advantageous when you need preset combinations of things and stuff like that. So the things changed over the years on what kind of rigs they were, So what someone would generally come to me and they have hey, I have all this stuff and I need to do this. And I need this functionality out of it, and for my gig that I'm doing, and so we design a system around their needs.
Yeah, and I guess, like, especially being around all that gear, like, you knew which chain of reaction would be best for a guitar tone, right? Like, you'd go effects and then delays, and then, like, you knew where to place things properly, as opposed to like some guitar guy just going in there and putting stuff in a chain. And
but that's this. But yes, there is more of a proper way to do things. But I've had people over the years, though, that want to do it a different way, which is interesting. I remember one time doing a pedal board for the bass player in Rage Against the Machine, Tim. And he wanted his delay first and his wah last. Just the polar opposite of what you normally, do. But we did it and it worked. It's like there's no rules. There shouldn't be rules. And how all these guitar sounds that were developed over the years were because people didn't have certain kinds of amps, and so if I series that into that amp, it sounds really cool, so I'm going to use that. So they created their sounds, created what they liked.
And especially at the time, because people are adventurous and they wanted to discover some new tone to sound complete polar opposite of the next guitar player down the block. I mean, was I was going to say, like, an experimental kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you had to, really. I mean, you didn't really, when I first started playing guitar, there really wasn't, multi-channel amplifiers and stuff like that. There was a Marshall. I guess there was a Boogie, I guess the Boogie was maybe one of the more first channel switchers. It was sort of a channel switcher.
Yeah.
The early ones, you had Marshall and Boogie basically early on. I mean, I guess there's other things that were in England and stuff, like Laney's and different things, but yeah, there wasn't a lot there. But a lot of sounds were created by treble boosters into a Vox, or a treble booster into a Laney, Tony Iommi.
Yeah.
So,
in your opinion, who was the first guitarist to do a wet, dry, wet setup?
The first? Oh, man.
Because there's a lot of people that talk about it.
That's a good question. So this would have been developed by Bob Bradshaw at the time, and how that developed when I had him on my show. How that developed was they used to slave amplifier heads into his effects racks and come out stereo. What that means is you loaded the head down with a load of some sort, or a load resistor, and you take a line out of the head, and it's basically a big preamp. And he would put that through the rack, and eventually he figured out that, hey, this load resistor doesn't sound that great. So if I use a real cabinet, it'll sound cool. So he started burying cabinets in speaker enclosures where you didn't really hear that cabinet. It just was the load for your tube amp, and then it went stereo. Well, then later it's like, well, why don't we just put that on stage also? And hence the wet was born. Who was the first one? I don't know. I mean, all this kind of revolved early on around like Eddie Van Halen, and I mean, the people that I recall doing, the first person that I recall doing it was Eddie Van Halen, but I could be totally wrong with that. And later on, Steve Stevens did it from Billy Idol, and other people also. Joe Holmes, that played with Ozzy for a while, did it, and oh man, a lot of people did over the time. If you've ever had the pleasure of playing big cabinets live with a wet, dry, wet with delays going, it sounds glorious.
I got it set up in my basement in the other room.
It's glorious.
It's insanity. Huge. Even at low volume, it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, it's huge sounding. So,
talking a little bit about Eddie Van Halen. I mean, I didn't want to turn this into the Eddie Van Halen Tone Talk episode, but like, just out of curiosity, because I know you've done extensive analysis of Eddie's original Plexi, and it's been covered before, but it'd be cool to get a refresher on the topic. I mean, talk a little bit about Ed's tone evolution over the years. And I mean, like, he went from those nice Marshalls to getting even gainier and gainier and gainier over time. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I'm a fan of the old stuff. And he's a guy that always wanted more. If it had a knob and he could turn it up, he wanted more out of it. So this started, a million years ago. He wanted more out of his Marshall, so he figured out ways to, use the Variac and it lowers the volume, but it sounds cool, or he always wants more. He always wanted more out of something, and I just think maybe it went too far after a while. But
is there such thing as too much?
He said to me before, he goes, I don't want to work that hard anymore in regards to the old Marshall. It wasn't, it's not that forgiving. It's not that easy to play. It's harder to squeeze those notes out of it,
Right. So, I know what you mean. It's like, he just got maybe weaker in the strings, and
yeah, I don't know. You get older, maybe it's just, just don't want to work that hard anymore,
Yeah. No, I totally get that. I would have never even taken that in consideration, that maybe it was just, it's easier to get the notes out with a lot of gain pumping through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's kind of like it, but it's the more gain you add, the more gain you have, the smaller the tone.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's not, gain is not good. I mean, but you want big and punchy, and you want, loud, big and punchy, it's a bigger tone. It attacks better. It's less compressed.
I've noticed that about like my EVH 5153, for example. I find it sounds squishy, if that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah. Well, that has more gain than anyone knows what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on I don't know which version you have, but
I've got the original run Fender one. I have the EL34.
The original one, the middle channel, the blue channel on the original one was pretty good. You can get the gain up high on that one. It wasn't exceptionally gainy on the middle channel.
Yeah.
The very first issue. But then they like tripled the gain on that channel later.
Oh, really? So if I buy like a new like 6L6, like a white one, for example,
it's like way more gain now than it used to be. So
because I have the 5153 Stealth, which is the one he did on like the 2015 tour.
Yeah, that's like a lot of gain.
A ton of gain, like insane.
Yeah.
Like the blue channel.
The blue channel on that, I turn the gain at 2.
Pretty much.
Yeah. It's an insane amount of gain. But
talking about that, how much of an effect does the actual guitar have on the tone of the amp?
Oh, it has a huge bearing. I think I know there's some people that have done some videos where it says it doesn't matter, but I don't hear that. I don't hear it that way. The kind of body wood you have in the guitar makes a difference. How it's a feel thing sometimes. Like a basswood guitar has a softer attack to it. It's not quite as like in your face, A hard ash guitar, on the other hand, is almost brutal. It's just, bright and just punches you right in the face. A maple guitar, same way. It's bright, punches you in the face, kind of.
Right.
Mahogany is thick and woody sort of sounding, but you put a maple cap on it, like on a Les Paul, and it brings back some of the snap and the attack. So it all makes a difference, like I always say, it depends what kind of sound you want, what thing.
Yeah. And of course, with Ed's tone over the years, I mean, like going from 1984 even on to like the 5150 tour, where it was like the live without a neck guitar tone is like, for the Sam fans, that's almost like the coveted tone. Like hearing him play 316 and some of those solo bits, it's like it sounds phenomenal. But then when
that was a Marshall. That was the Marshall, slaved through a Bradshaw rack with a load resistor because he preferred it at the time. And he liked what the load resistor did. It adds a little compression and kind of rolls the top end off a little bit. And then came out through an H&H power amp in stereo. And, he had a couple SDE 3000s, a little Eventide here and there. And, a PCM 70 for like Cathedral and stuff.
Yeah. It was pretty straightforward and simple in a way, but also kind of complicated.
Yeah. It was a stereo rig. It wasn't that crazy.
Yeah. And then later on, like For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, I mean, like once again, it got gainier.
Yeah, for that though, then it was the Wet Dry Wet. So for that tour,
Soldano amps and all that stuff. I don't know if he recorded with the Soldano amp.
No, he recorded with the Soldano amp. I think the tour wound up being the Peavies.
Right.
I think I'm a little foggy on that.
So talking about that, I mean, like just like modern amps in general. I mean, like, why do you think it's I guess like practical for everybody to sort of like have like that gainy kind of sound, or like, do you think it comes down to players' taste, or is it a manufacturer's fault where it's like, okay, well, this is what we're making, so this is what everybody has to use?
I think the biggest issue is, people just got out of hand over the years. So people started making gainier amps, and then they got used to them, and and
that damn tube screamer ruined it for everyone.
And also people started playing with less volume, down to no volume, and there's an interaction between a guitar and an amp. I think we had Joe Bonamassa on our show the other day, and there's an interaction between a guitar and an amp. There's a symbiotic relationship between the two, and how the guitar is reacting to the speaker cabinet and the vibrations and the sustain you get from volume is a huge thing. With no volume, you might seem like, hey, I need more gain or something, because you're not having any relationship between the pickups and the cabinet and anything. So it's different. It's sort of like, okay, if you have a lot of gain when you're playing down low and then you turn it up, what happens? It's unusable.
Yeah, it's uncontrollable.
It's uncontrollable. It's unusable. And all of a sudden you're reaching back for your gain to turn it down. Because the volume is doing what you need it to do.
Yeah, it gets louder.
It's just like the biggest issue these days.
But it's also because there's so many quiet stages these days. Like
I don't believe in that whatsoever. I don't. If you go see a band that has real amps on stage, I don't even care if they're playing them quieter. If you go see a band with real amps on stage, you have a better viewing and enjoyment experience than a quiet stage with all modelers. You just do. I mean, there's nothing coming off the stage. You don't go near the front of the stage. Forget that.
Especially if they don't have any front fills, you're not hearing shit.
That's all over. Yeah, you better go stand in the back if you want to,
That's what I don't get. But like, people going and spending, like $1,200 on a concert ticket to be front row or like, on the barricade of the pit because it's like, well, you're not going to hear anything
at all. Maybe.
Yeah.
Surely.
If you're lucky, there's a speaker in front of you. If you're lucky, and if I forget which band it was, I went to see a band in an arena and there was no front fills whatsoever, and they were all like modelers. Like it was the quietest stage ever. And I couldn't hear anything. You hear the drums, and like that's kind of it.
Yeah. And the other big problem these days with shows I find is that more modern.
They're all Pro Tools, and it's all tracks.
Well, yes, that's one. More modern sound guys don't seem to know what to do with guitar. And you go see a band that is a guitar-based band. It's guitars are the main focus of the band, let's say. And you hear, bass, drums, and vocals really well, and the guitars seem kind of low. And I'm like, this is a guitar-based band. These guitars need to be up really loud,
Yeah.
Well, then you can't hear the vocal. No one cares about the vocal. They care about the guitars. It's a guitar base. They're here for the guitar player. It would be like seeing Van Halen without Eddie Van Halen in the mix.
Right.
Like, that doesn't make any sense.
It's funny. I had that experience I went to see Shania Twain a couple of weeks ago. I'm a huge Shania Twain fan, huge Mutt Lange fan. And like, there was just certain points in when like a front of house guy just doesn't know the music.
Yeah, sure.
And like, there was just certain bits where I'm like, the fiddle part should have gone up here. Why isn't that guitar blistering my face right now in the solo? Like, it was just the flattest sounding, saddest mix. And I was so disappointed as a fan because I know how the stuff's supposed to sound.
Yeah.
Talking about that, somebody wrote in a question. My friend Victor, he said, realistically, how long can we expect vacuum tubes to be produced?
They've been saying that for I don't know. I think they started saying that in the 90s. So they literally have been saying the exact same sentence since the 90s. So there you go.
Yeah, it's not going to be anytime soon.
No, I think we're fine. We have you still have Russian tubes, you still have Slovakian, and you have a different factory in China now. So I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon.
Do they all sound different?
Yeah, I mean, every brand has its own sort of signature to how it sounds.
Right. Talking about just modeling, for example, I mean, like, given the dramatic improvement in like modeling amps like Fractals and the Neural DSP, I mean, I was just backstage at Megadeth, and Dave Mustaine and the whole crew, they were all just running Neural DSP Quad Cortex into like front of house, and that's it. Like, do you think in the next decade or so, like, people are still going to be buying real tube amps, or like, is it getting scary as a manufacturer?
Well, I mean, they're still buying tube amps. I mean, I still think there's a lot of people out there that don't want to deal with the headaches of menus. And I mean, do you own a modeler?
I do, yeah.
And how many headaches have you had? Just, okay, I got to plug it into the computer to edit this. I just want to turn the gain down, but I got to plug it into the computer now. And oh, wait, the computer editor is now not talking to it.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Okay, what's wrong there? And then you're in tech hell for a while, and then eventually you figure it out. And by then you were able to turn your gain up, but it's an hour and a half later.
Yeah. And you're going through forums trying to figure out how to do it, or going on
where an amp, you go over to the knob, you turn the gain up, you're done, and you play guitar. So I mean, I think honestly, the amp approach, or some sort of approach that had knobs, is a better solution.
Right. No, I agree. And it's, once again, it's the analog versus digital argument, right? Some things you just win with analog.
Right, for sure.
Well, it was so great to talk to you. I know we're running out of time, but of course, I'm a big fan of Tone Talk. I love to catch an episode when I can. Big fan of the channel, and yeah, it was great.
I've seen a bunch of your little interviews and stuff. It's been cool.
Hell yeah, a bunch of my little interviews. Which one did you see? Which one?
That's a good question, right? I can't, and of course, right now I can't think of any of them.
It's funny when you interview guitar players, for example. I mean, like, what?
I've seen clips and things, and have I watched an entire show? No,
probably not. I haven't either.
The entire show. I don't watch my own show.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
But I like it. It's a cool. You've had a lot of great guests on.
I mean, I'll go from talking to Ed Sheeran on the radio to then talking to you on the podcast, or Dua Lipa on the radio and then Paul Stanley on the podcast. Like, yeah, it's I like it.
How'd you get started doing this?
The podcast or just like broadcasting?
All of it. Now I'm interviewing you.
I know, right? Well, I got into it. You know what? My musical awakening was seeing the video for Jump when I was about 4 or 5 years old. My Uncle Terrence had the Best of Volume 1 DVD or VHS at the time with all the music videos on it. And he always had Kiss posters, and I was deathly afraid of Gene Simmons growing up because of the tongue, and he just looked evil. And he put on Van Halen, and for some reason, seeing Eddie with the Frankenstein and playing the keyboard part, I felt really safe, really watching it, and like it just like did something inside me, and I was like, I want to do that. Yeah. And then from there, like later on, I discovered like Shania Twain, and I was like, why do I love these songs so much? And then I was a fan of Def Leppard, and I was like, why do I love these songs so much? And then
that's why Mutt Lange.
Discovered my love for Mutt Lange, and I got into radio literally by accident. I built these Eddie tribute guitars, like a 5150 and a Frankenstein, and I showed my buddy, my dad's friend at our local radio station over here on the back porch of our native community radio station, because I'm from a native reservation over here. We're Mohawks. And I showed up there. I'm like, hey, I want to show you these guitars I built, because he was the biggest Van Halen fan in town. And rolled up there on my guitars on the back of my four-wheeler. And the program director was out on the back porch, and they needed a fill-in like the next day to do traffic. And I was like, hey, well, what if I come in and hang out and see how this is done? And just kept going back. And, yeah, literally at 15. And then I was still in high school. And then 2 years later, I ended up getting hired at the biggest radio station in Montreal, doing overnights at 17. You had to be 18 just to be on their promo street team, like doing events and stuff. But I got on the air at 17. Everybody hated me on the street team, but And then I just went from there, and then I got on the radio in Toronto. I was on the air in the Middle East. Like I've been on the air. I'm on the air in the U.S. now. But the funny thing is that I started this podcast because I wanted to interview Gene and Paul and like Joe and Phil from Def Leppard, all these rock guys, or even people like you, and I didn't have an outlet for it. And I pitched it to the radio station, and they were like, no, this doesn't target Jessica, who's a 45 middle-aged woman who has problems balancing time between her kid's soccer practice and getting laid and dating. And I was like, okay, so you know what? I'll just do it on my own. And went from there. I had a partner, Mitch LaFawn. He and I, we teamed up at one point, and he was my co-host, and he had to bow out because he ended up catching the Rona last year. He's got the long COVID, and he hasn't recovered. It's basically rendered him like essentially disabled at this point. So
that's horrible.
Yeah, I've been on my own. But yeah, so that's how I started this thing. And you know, I wanted to talk to guitar players. I wanted to talk to people like you. And it's and if I didn't have this, you know, I'd just be fanboying.
That makes sense. You know, it's like I always feel like doing the Tone Talk show I do, did. You know, I'm always like, you know, I gotta document these stories from these people, because I feel like it's gonna be lost one day, and if I can just talk to them about it, you know, before, you know, or hopefully not, but before someone passes or something, you know. And it just like it needs to be documented for future generations, and people need some wisdom, you know, of, you know.
And I'm also a musician, and like, so it's like when I interview people like Phil Collin from Def Leppard, for example, like, you know, I want to know how Mutt Lange recorded the backing vocals on Hysteria. I want to know how you got the guitar tone on Pour Some Sugar on Me. And I mean, Phil,
good stuff.
You know, like the good shit. Like, did you really use a Rockman? And then he goes and whips out the actual original Rockman that he used on the record. You know, It's not the stock like would you rather a weekend in New York or where's your favorite place to perform or like the top 40 radio questions.
The hard questions.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I
you
had this
remember what you did.
I had this program director that would like I had to interview who was it? It was like I was going to interview like Demi Lovato or something like that. And he was like, okay, here's the questions I want you to ask her. I want you to ask her, like, if she was on a desert island, would she rather take regular flavored chips or would she take chocolate? And I looked at him, I'm like, I am not asking her that question. Like,
no one cares about that stuff.
No,
does anyone watching people care about this stuff?
But that's the thing.
I know I don't. I think everything should be. See, now I can't do anything. I've learned that in any video, I can't do anything that's scripted. It does not work for me.
Yep.
I have to just talk off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And I think that comes off much more naturally. You know,
well, look,
you just, you know, maybe you kind of have an idea what you want to ask or what you want to do, but you know, just got to talk off the top of your head and where basically, you know, shooting the crap on Tone Talk is what, you know, just like that's the idea, you know. Just,
yeah. And look, like an artist comes on my show, 99% of the time they're plugging a record or a tour or something. So we always circle it back around to that. But I don't have a list of questions prepped in front of me. Like even this, like, you know, it's off the cuff, like ask you about who's the first people that do wet, dry, wet. I don't have that written down.
I mean, that's the best, you know, you just gotta yeah. Then you're surprised. And then you're fumbling over your answer.
I'll tell you like just how stupid like corporate radio is. For example, okay, I'll give you a prime example. I interviewed David Guetta and I asked him a question. So he had a song out and it was super like early 90s dance sounding. Okay. And so I asked him, I was like, just conceptually, how did you come up with the production and like the sonic landscape of this song? Did you sit there with like an Oberheim keyboard and you had like this vintage patch from the 80s and that inspired you to create this? Like, where did this start? And he was super impressed with the fact that I said Oberheim because that's exactly what he used. And then we had this great conversation about it.
Mm-hmm.
I got reprimanded by my program director because he told me that our audience doesn't care about that. They don't know anything about that. And I shouldn't be asking him any of those questions because I should be asking him about touring. I should be asking him about life, you know, what kind of foods he likes, like lifestyle stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to stop him and was like, you do realize that Jessica, 45 years old, is not watching an interview with David Guetta on our radio station. It's people that are fans of his and that probably care about music production or DJing. And the fact that he appreciated that question just goes to show that he was interested.
Yeah.
But you can't win. So that's why I was like, you know what? Next time David Guetta, I'm going to do an interview. I want to make sure it's on this show so I can ask him those questions. Not like, hey, do you like ketchup chips? Have you ever had poutine when you played Montreal? It's always the same stuff. I had to interview the Jonas Brothers once, and it was like questions like that. And I wanted to talk to Joe about guitar playing, like about why he plays a Les Paul. But no, it was like, do you guys really still have your purity rings? And yeah, like literally stuff like that. Like,
wow. You know, okay. Well, yeah. You know.
So yeah, that's why I like this kind of stuff.
You gotta do.
Yeah. When you talk to guitar players and when you interview guys on like, you know, Tone Talk, for example, I'm like, what are the questions that really gets an artist and a guitar player going?
You know, every artist is different. I've learned this over the years. So anytime you're dealing with an artist, there's a certain you almost have to be a psychologist sometimes on how you treat certain people versus other people.
Mm-hmm.
Some are really loose and easy and no problem. Others can be touchy and weird about things. So you have to sort of know what you're getting into, and you have to be careful of what you say at first, at least, and until you kind of feel it out, you know. Fortunately, a lot of times people that come on our show, I already kind of know or have
I was gonna say, like,
not
usually,
always, not always, but you know, I kind of sometimes will have some sort of relationship with them or have met them or something.
Yeah.
And so I got a better idea, you know, on how to do it. What really, the show just steers itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's the relationship you have with the guest that's on the show, and then the show steers itself. It just goes in whatever direction. At least that's how we work ours. It goes in whatever direction it goes. You know, sometimes it can go off the cliff, like the Jakey Lee episode. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
I've heard of it. Yes.
Yeah, that's a 4-hour show.
The infamous Jakey Lee
while
episode.
drinking.
Perfect. But you know what? That's when you get them all liquored up, and you're like, tell me, really, what was going on? You know?
Well, yeah, and he said some shocking things to me. You know, that I literally, you know, it's.
Did you get some calls the next day? Like, what the fuck, Dave?
No. Actually, everyone loved it. That's the thing. So if you go off the rails on air, they love it.
Yeah.
It's some crazy amount of views on that episode. And you know, and he said some really interesting things that had been originally said years ago in Krang magazine in more detail than he did on the show. But, you know, he said that, you know, at one point in time, Motley Crue had asked him to join the band to replace Mick Mars. And this was, you know, 1980-ish or, you know, 81-ish.
Right.
When
Before
that happened.
first record.
And it was printed in Krang magazine in great detail in like 1981. We have actually found the episode, the
article
in an old magazine. So of course, when he said this on our show, it went to all the rock news and stuff. And then Nikki Sixx is, you know, going, well, you know, talked about some has been, you know, blah, 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 you know, just stating stuff for publicity. And let me tell you, this couldn't be farther from the truth. Jake couldn't give a rat's ass about publicity or anything. You know, he was just telling the story.
He doesn't seem like that kind of guy that would just say something.
He's not that kind of guy. He wouldn't say that, you know. And then the other one was he blurted out, did I ever tell you about the time Mick Mars called me a slant-eyed Japanese bastard? And I look at him, I go, he what? And we had this whole discussion about that. You know, that like shocked me even. I was like, what? He did what?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think it's well documented that Mick is like he's a pretty racist guy.
Well, you know, I don't know. You know, I don't know that for a fact. I've met before. I don't know that for a fact.
There's videos of him and
then Jake went on to go, well, no, I'm not calling Mick racist.
Right.
I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
He just said it in the heat of the moment, and you had to have been there to understand what was going on at the time. And which he explained in more detail, but I don't even remember all the details. So
yeah, people can go watch it if they want, but that's
watch the episode.
And that's also like an off. That's also like an off-color, like kind of comment you say when you're like chilling with your friends and your buds or something. Like, you know, maybe he wasn't even being serious.
I mean, you know, it was you know, of course it went to rock news, like, you know,
instantly. I'm sure Blabbermouth ate that up
instantly. And of course the title was, you know, Jakey Lee calls Mick Mars a racist, which
on Tone Talk.
And then of course you read the article, and of course he says distinctly in that you know what was said, and it isn't that title at all, which is typical for most news.
Well, you know what? That'll happen to me all the time. Like, you know, yeah, I'll do an interview and I have nothing to do with the publication, but then they'll go and make an article out of an interview I do. And it could be like the worst headline with, like, you know, make it taken out of context. And then I get an email from management and they're like, what the fuck is this? You need to delete this. And I'm like, I have nothing to. I don't work for Ultimate Classic Rock. I have no control over them. Like Loudwire. I don't work for Loudwire. Like
yeah.
But you never know.
I mean, that's what happens with shows all the time, constantly.
Did you ever work with Mick Mars over the years?
I didn't. I've met him before briefly at his house once, and he was. In fact, I'd like to have him on Tone Talk.
That would be very interesting because you just pull up the clip like I just want to play you something real fast.
You're probably not going to do that, but I could go, hey, Jakey Lee says hi.
That would be hilarious. That would be legendary right there. And like, come on, get the two of them on a Zoom. Come on.
Oh, oh boy.
Who's had one of the most elaborate rigs that you've worked on over the years?
Most elaborate.
Like complex to the point of it's just ridiculous. Like,
well, okay, so there is a newer band that is really interesting. So a friend of mine, a guitar player named George Pahone, he plays with a band called Cairo Knife Fight.
I don't know them.
Cairo Knife Fight is a 2-person band, and you should look them up. They have
them up now. Yeah.
Recent video just got released recently. It's a heavy vibey band. But George also is it's funny. This music is nothing like it, but George also plays guitar in the Black Eyed Peas.
Oh, no way.
So yeah. So but it could be polar opposite.
Yeah.
And
that happens a lot though. Like
and like way different. But George's rig is so intensely, he must have let's see, I mean, there's 3 or 4 different Friedman amps, a bass amp, something, because it's a 2-piece band, right?
Okay.
So a bass amp, so there's like 6 amps going, a bass amp, an elaborate switching system with all sorts of textures and pedals and things. The routing confuses me. Wow. I built it for him, but it's intensely crazy. Funny, we saw him. I actually took Jakey Lee when I was in Vegas once to see them play. They were playing in Vegas because George now lives in Vegas. And I go, you got to come see my buddy's band. And he was telling me later, he goes, yeah, when you say I got to come see your buddy's band, I was like, oh boy, I don't know. And I'm like, I told Jake, I go, do you think I would tell you to come see a band if it wasn't fantastic and great? Come on, man. I'm not going to drag you out to a bar band or something. And he went up to George and he was talking to George and he goes, you can't drink before you use this, huh? Because it's so elaborate. He goes, oh no.
Right.
He does a lot of looping and a lot of different textures and things to it, and it's crazy. So that's a more modern thing that I've done. But in the past, there's been big rigs that I did for, Steve Stevens and thing that were reasonably elaborate. I mean, there's probably been so many rigs I've done, I forgot what was elaborate or not elaborate now. It's I can't even remember them all.
And it's crazy with the technology because it's like, you can have Ableton like doing all your patch changes for you and the show computer, all of that stuff is just like, it's insanity these days.
Yeah, but none of that with the Cairo Knife Fight. It's all in real time. It's real.
Yeah,
there's not tracks. He's making the loops.
Yeah, he must have a lot of presets going then.
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of shit going on.
Yeah. How does that work now? It's like, so if you have an analog amp and you need the show computer to make patch changes for you on your rig, like, is it all still MIDI? Or has it
it's essentially MIDI, and it switches the switcher that's in your rig, and that switcher is switching all the analog gear in and out and channels on your amp and things like that. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
I was talking to the guitar player for Shania Twain, and he was talking about how like they would literally dial in like wah pedal swells. In rehearsal and stuff like that. I'm like, that's so robotic.
I don't totally believe in all that kind of stuff. I think a band should play as a band. I mean, I understand if they have to reproduce certain things, okay, maybe I understand with Shania Twain with all the stuff that was recorded with Mutt Lange and everything, and but man, a band needs to play like a band. I think I don't think a band should rely on tracks.
Yeah.
I just don't. I think they should be able to play it, and it's gotten too insane with that. At that point in time, just stay home, listen to the album.
Yeah. One of my favorite videos is of Nikki Sixx when the guy runs on stage and he takes the bass off. He's gonna pull a Keith Richards.
Yeah, the bass is still going.
The bass is still going.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though, they dialed that back real quick because I saw them a couple of weeks ago with Def Leppard in Syracuse. Drove down to the show and they were playing. Like there was no accompaniment guitars. Like Nikki, like everything was obviously the click and everything was still going, but like everything else was pulled down. It was just John's guitar, Nikki's bass, backing vocals, and drums. So they pulled that shit back real fast after all that stuff blew up.
Yeah, they had to.
Well, yeah. You literally have something to prove at that point.
Yeah.
If I was to buy a guitar rig right now, what would be, in your opinion, the ideal guitar rig for a guitar player in 2023?
Oh man, that's impossible to answer because everyone's idea of what everyone has a different. How do I want to say this? So if you're someone that plays music like Queens of the Stone Age, that guitar rig is going to be radically different from, say, a modern rock rig like a rig I just did for Jason Hook from his new band Flat Black. So that's going to be wildly different. So what's the ideal guitar rig? I don't know. That would depend on you and your music.
Right.
Do
you get calls from people that are like, can you build me a rig that sounds just like Eddie Van Halen in 1995?
Absolutely. I've had to do it. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Hey, I want to build this replica of his original stuff, or I want to do this era stuff, or yeah, sure. I've done it. Sure.
I want to,
you're not going to say no.
Yeah. I want the guitar tone from Dr. Feelgood. Like, can you make me a rig that sounds like that?
Yes, we can. The thing is, I mean, that stuff's fun. That stuff's fun to do. It's because generally speaking, that's someone that has, at this point in his life, disposable income. Mm-hmm. He's not worried about where his next meal is coming from. He's well off at this point, and he just wants his toys. He wants to have fun, and I think that's awesome. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever.
I completely agree.
I mean, as an amp manufacturer or any music manufacturer, I mean, 95% or more of your audience is just someone that plays at home.
The bedroom guitars.
It really is. I mean, pro guitar players is like 5% or something.
Right.
Or are they playing bars or something,
What's the favorite amp? Like, what's your favorite amp that you build?
Oh man. I have a new favorite all the time. It depends on which new one I'm making. The newest one I'm making. The B100 Deluxe is fantastic. That's a great amp, or the Steve Stevens signature amp, SSV2, the newest version. They both do slightly different things, so I like them both. But then I can go into other amps too. Our small box amp, that's cool for simplicity now, and kind of sound you want.
Yeah, right. So say a 15-year-old guitarist wants to get into guitar and sees this on Instagram. I'm going to get a Friedman amp. Like, what do you think is like the best entry-level amp for like a new guitar player?
Well, you could start with one of our 20-watt amps. So we had released a Jakey Lease JEL20 recently that is seemingly wildly popular right now. That's a cool amp. We also had the JJ Junior, which was Jerry Cantrell's signature in 20 watt. I say 20 watts because that's going to be the cheapest platform, and maybe as a kid, that might be the cool one to get. If you want to go up to a 50-watt version, I'd say maybe the Runt 50. That's on the low end of our scale. It's a dirty and a clean channel. It's really simple. It's just, but it's not crazy high gain or anything. Again, what sort of music?
Right. Yeah. What if I want a Dan Huff kind of modern country sound?
Yeah, well, I mean, isn't modern country really Def Leppard?
Basically, right? I'm gonna have to get a Tom
So
Schultz
you're just
rock.
doing a basic hard rock sort of standard. I mean, most of my amps can do something like that.
Yeah, they clean up really well.
Yeah. So
What's your opinion on the Rockmans?
oh man, I hated that thing when I was a kid. I had one. I mean, I don't. I hear it now. I hear it on records and stuff, and I'm like, I mean, Def Leppard did a good job, or Mutt Lange did a good job of
Giving it some life.
that sound as good as it could, but I can still hear it on some parts of George Lynch songs where the clean part is you can hear it plain as day. It's a Rockman,
Right.
Yeah,
there's so much like Mr. Big stuff, like Paul Gilbert.
and I always sort of, even though the band Boston was cool, I always sort of didn't like his guitar sound. So
right. It's true because it's got that sort of like Michael Landau, Dana, like studio session in LA,
but overly processed, like
Yeah.
in a sort of fake sort of way. But that's what the Rockman does, So
yeah.
I mean, the stuff with Def Leppard was recorded crazy. I mean, like they record a string at a time, on some of the stuff, and to get the chord out, it's like insane, especially considering it was on tape at the time.
Yeah. Phil told me that was the pre-chorus of Hysteria. Go bing, 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 and then bing, 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 like one string at a time.
Yeah, it's like insanity. So,
but it sounds great.
It does sound great. You can't deny that. Of course, I also like the early records too.
Yeah,
High and Dry.
If I wanted to play a wet, dry, wet setup at like a bedroom level, what's the best way to achieve that?
You can do it with what you have.
Yeah.
Right? You can just turn the volume down.
Yeah, but now talk about that though. Does volume affect the gain and like the tone of the amp?
Well, I mean, yes, volume can affect the tone of the amp to some extent. My amps are known to have really good masters, so generally it sounds good really low. Also,
does the warmth of the tubes affect the tone still?
Well, here's the thing: most of sounds out of my amps are all just done in the preamp section of the amp. You're not distorting the power section of the amp until you're getting it up around 5 or 6 on a 100-watt amp, and that's really loud. And and at that point, you're not really, unless you're pushing the power amp, you're not really getting much out of the power amp. Now, how loud the interaction between that and the speaker sounds different at different volume levels.
Okay.
So there is that, so and also sort of the feel. I mean, as it gets louder, it seemingly gets punchier and more forceful. But the speaker definitely sounds different as the volume level increases.
So if I'm playing an amp that doesn't have a master on it, like, and I have my gain cranked, but I have my volume at like a 2, like it'll sound different compared to the volume being at a 5 or a 6.
So if you're saying if you have an amp that has no master?
Yeah. Like say I'm playing a 5153 that doesn't have a master. Each individual channel has its own volume.
Well, yeah, but that's a master. So
okay.
Yeah, pain in the ass with that is you have to adjust them all down and adjust them all up. I like a system master on the amp, so you can, once you get to a balance between the channels, you can just go up and down with the levels. But yeah, I mean, like now if you're talking like a traditional non-master volume amp, meaning like say an old Marshall or something, yeah, you're not going to ever get it to distort because in the preamp there is no distortion. It doesn't distort till you're distorting the phase inverter of the amp, which in turn then distorts sort of the power section of the amp.
Okay, interesting.
That's a totally different sound. It's so dynamic and so explosive sounding.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean now. That makes sense. What about one last question? This was a concept that was like freshly brought to my attention. Burning in tubes. Now, is this a real thing?
Well, okay. Yes. When tubes are first tested, generally speaking, they should be burned in for a reasonably long period of time, in order for them to be matched and tested properly. Because what'll happen is if they're not burned in for a long period of time, even though they're matching right now, when you run it for a while, they become unmatched, maybe. And it's a more consistent way of testing things. So yes,
Okay.
burning in tubes, burned in like amplified parts or something. Apex Matching, they offer burned in sets and stuff where they burn them longer.
Right.
That's a good idea, actually, just for stability. And
It's kind of like burning in speakers. Like they say, like, you know, if I buy a new cabinet, like
that makes a difference.
you should play like really, really loud for like a prolonged period, like for a short period of time, and then it like opens it up a little bit.
It totally changes it quite radically, actually.
Huh, interesting. So
Yeah.
so if I bought like a new amp from you guys, like, would you recommend burning in my tubes, or like is it
Well,
going to
no,
sound
they're
great
already
out of
burned
the
in.
box?
It's already
Okay.
burned in. Like and not only are the tubes burned in pre to us putting them in, the amp gets burned in for 24 hours also, before it even hits my test bench.
Okay.
And so, yeah, no, I mean, you don't have to do that. But speakers, brand new speakers don't sound that great until they're worn in for a little while.
Okay. Interesting. When do you find speakers start sounding good?
Well, that's hard. That's hard to judge. Like in the past, because I have a shop where it doesn't matter. I can brutalize some cabinets if they're my own personal cabinets for a while when they're brand new. So I can, I'll let 100-watt amp pound through a cabinet for 3 hours, and I tested this once. Tested like doing it for an hour and then listening to the cabinet, then doing it for 2 hours, listening 3 hours, and then 6 hours. You gotta take a break in between times because you can actually freeze the voice coils because they get so hot. And it radically sounded better as the longer that thing got worn in. Warmer, better, richer, fuller, just insanely better, especially with like the likes of a vintage 30 or something.
Right. It's interesting because, like, just thinking about that now, I remember the classic marketing material that came out when the 5153 was being announced, and Ed was talking about how he put the amp in a warehouse and let it feed back, and then came back a month later to see if it was still on, and it was still feeding back. Like, theoretically, like, is that really, like, you think that's true?
It is true. He did do that.
And it was still,
he like hit the strings on his guitar, laid it on the floor, had the amp cranked, and left his studio and left it on for like days.
and
It was still operating when he came back. That was his torture test. Yeah.
did the amp still sound good though after? That's the question. Like, how does it not burn out? Does it not catch fire?
Well, it didn't. So that's the idea. It's
Yeah.
so it doesn't, so it's to make sure it doesn't.
What are some of the crazy, like, weird modifications that Ed made you do over the years?
I don't know if there's really any modifications he had me do. I mean, like, just I built his rigs, and that's what I did. And then I restored his original amp to its, or seemingly, according to him, its former glory.
Okay. And did it sound like that Van Halen one record when
That sounded awesome.
Why do you think Ed didn't take that tone and replicate it into a 5150 line of amps? Like, why do you think he's stuck with the modern super gained out stuff?
He was looking for something else. He looked for, more gain and more. Do
you make an amp that sounds like that amp?
Not yet, but I am doing a vintagey Marshall sort of amp, vintagey plexi sort of amp. Will come up sometime next year.
So when you say not yet, do we get something in
the
works?
Yeah.
Interesting. You have a name for it?
No, not yet.
Gonna call it the Ed?
No, definitely not.
Not even remotely related to Van Halen whatsoever.
No, it really isn't. It's really, you know, my take on the plexi, plexi kind of thing.
Nice. Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
because everybody talks about Plexi, Marshall, and this and that, but it's like, why are they so sought after?
It's a great era of Marshall.
But what does that make it? What does that mean? A great era of Marshall? Like, what was the parts they were using? The people that were making them?
I don't think. I mean, I think. After like 1983 or so, Marshall really ceased to exist in my book.
Wow.
After the JC 800, it was kind of all over. And really, the funny thing is, growing up, the JC 800, when that came out, people were like, this doesn't sound as good as the older ones. So, this was the bastard stepchild of, and now they're like these revered amps and stuff. And they weren't really.
Right. Interesting. Well, it was so great to talk to you and meet you. This is super fun. You answered a lot of my dumb guitar questions, but that's what people like on episodes like this.
That's what I do, I guess.
Dumb guitar questions.
Next time
you need a dumb guitar question answered, Dave will send you a video of him explaining to you why what you got to do. I'm giving everybody your number.
No.
That's the best. So what's the best way for people to reach out? I mean, like, obviously you got the website and everything, but like you got socials and like Tone Talk on YouTube.
I mean, emails. We have friedmanamps@gmail.com. You're going to get me there all the time if you have Friedman related questions. Obviously our website, friedmanamplification.com. And we have all sorts of, we have a Facebook user group that is out there in the world that everyone participates in. We have our Instagram, which off the top of my head, 2 Instagrams. There's a personal one I have, Friedman Amps Dave, and Friedman. Sorry, I forgot. I don't handle that. So
I'm gonna go following you on Instagram. Oh, it's Friedman_amps.
There you go. That's the official one, and then Friedman Amps Dave is the one for me.
The product of decades-long pursuit of tonal superiority by amp guru Dave Friedman. Now also guitars and pedals.
There you go.
I love that. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. We'll have to do this again, and I'll have more questions next time.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem, man.
I'll ask you the David Guetta, and I'll just ask you total like top 40 radio questions next time.
And you'll watch me not be able to answer them, probably. Yeah.
Okay, if you're on a desert island, which would you prefer, In-N-Out or Raising Cane's?
In-N-Out.
You gotta go In-N-Out. All right, man. Thanks a lot.
All right, man.
An all-new episode of The Jeremy White Show.
Available wherever you stream.